Okay, let's talk about constipation. Let's talk about some home remedies if you're experiencing this. So constipation, generally speaking, we should have 1 to 2 healthy, full-formed bowel movements each day. And a lot of people, they're one every other day. That's probably the most common when I see clients in the office. And sometimes it's 1 a week, right? 1 a week, and this is horrific. There's a lot of doctors are now diagnosing this condition, IBS type C. That stands for constipation. IBS stands for irritable bowel syndrome. So the reality is this: that when the bowels are constipated, it's typically for a number of different reasons. But one of the reasons is people are stressed out and they try to eat on the go. You ever been in the car and you're driving through somewhere and you pick something up quick and you're eating while you're working, while you're talking, while you're driving in high traffic? Like, that's a mistake. Your body, when you're eating, is designed to be at rest because the part of your nervous system that is activated during eating is called the parasympathetic nervous system. That's the nervous system that tells your body to release digestive enzymes and stomach acid. It's also the part of your nervous system that creates the propulsive movement of your intestine, the peristaltic movement. So that's the muscles as they contract and they push food down through your body. So, from your mouth to your anus, right? Because we want things, ultimately we want to have a healthy toilet time, right? So if we're stressed out before dinner, if we're stressed while we're eating, this is going to be one of the major contributing factors to constipation. So before you sit down to eat, take a minute, turn off the TV, turn off the radio, have a peaceful conversation, something that makes you happy, or do something that makes you happy, but be in a state of good peace. Now, some people find that prayer before dinner gives them a sense of peace before eating. And I think, if you're a spiritual person, that should be right up your alley. Some people also find that breathing, like deep breathing before a meal, is also very calming. And so you can sit down and you can do deep breathing for a couple of minutes, 2 to 3 minutes of deep breathing is going to activate your parasympathetic nervous system. And that's going to improve your digestive flow. So it's going to improve your ability to turn on the digestive tract, neurologically speaking. Also, when you're sitting down to eat, a lot of people inhale. I remember when I was in the military, when I was in the Air Force, and so in basic training, we'd go to the chow hall, and we had like 10 minutes to eat, and I was the last one to get my meal, but I was also the first one that had to be done when I was in basic because of the role that I played. And anyway, so I was last one in, first one that had to be done. So what they basically made us do is inhale our food. It took me close to a year once I got out of the military to slow down and start like functionally chewing my food. But if you don't chew your food well, you're missing a huge part of digestion. Number one, chewing stimulates digestive neurological stimulus to activate the stomach and get the rest of the digestive tract warmed up and ready to go. Chewing also releases saliva that contains enzymes like amylase that helps you start breaking down enzymatically the food that you're eating. But more importantly, chewing is important for the physical breakdown of your food to get it ready for the enzymatic response. So just chewing your food well can make a massive difference in your GI tract. And this is especially true. Now, some of you may have a really robust digestion, and this is not that big of a problem for you. But again, a lot of you, coming off of years of gluten-induced GI damage, your guts are not in great shape. And so one of the things that you can do today, right now, is just start chewing your food very thoroughly. Chew it until it's somewhat pasty before you swallow it. And that takes the pressure off of your damaged GI tract to have to do quite so much work. You do the physical chewing action, reduces the enzymatic process necessary to break the food down completely. Again, we mentioned it, relax before dinner, but also eat in a peaceful environment. Like, you shouldn't be having an argument or a fight at the dinner table. That's the wrong time to do that. Again, we don't want our sympathetic nervous system activated. We want our parasympathetic nervous system activated. Water is important here. Now, it's important to note that when you're eating your meals, ice water is a bad idea. Ice suppresses blood flow, right? Cold suppresses blood flow. So if you dump a bunch of ice cold water into your gut, you're basically suppressing the blood flow to the area. Remember, one of the things that happens when we're getting ready to digest is our nervous system diverts more blood to the GI tract on purpose. It's doing it for a reason. Why? We need blood to digest food. We're getting prepared to send the nutrients and the oxygen to the digestive organs to help them do their job. So if you basically, if you ice it, you're reducing blood flow to the area, and that's a bad idea. It can hinder your digestion. So if you're drinking water with dinner, room temperature is best. Now, as a general rule of thumb too, it's not that you need to drink water with the meal. Some people actually don't do as well drinking water with the meal. It's that you need to drink enough water over the course of the day. So this is daily intake, and it's different for different folks, but kind of as a rough estimate, 64 ounces a day for most adults is somewhere in the right neighborhood. And remember this, if you're eating fruits and vegetables, that, you know, the vast majority of fruits and vegetables are water. So you count that as part of your water. You know, when I say 64 ounces, it doesn't mean you have to get out a measure and rule every cup or measure every cup, but know that if you eat a lot of plant-based foods, you're getting water from the plant-based foods provided, especially raw ones, because the less you cook them, the more water they contain. So that's a source of water in the diet for you. So don't forget about that water. Water also helps the bowels move. Water is liquid, right? And so flow is important. So people who are dehydrated oftentimes complain of constipation. We'll see this a lot in athletes as well who sweat profusely when they exercise, and they become dehydrated. So make sure if you are exercising, especially if you're exercising aggressively or if you're a heavy sweater, that you're getting enough water back into your diet to make sure that you have enough liquid to push fluidic propulsion through your bowel. Fiber is also important. You know, there are a number of plant-based fibers that basically what they do is they feed. A lot of people think fiber is bulk, and so it pushes, you know, poop through you, but they feed bacteria. It's one of the main functions of fiber. You know, fiber is oftentimes referred to as a prebiotic. So if you see a supplement that says prebiotic, it's a fiber, right? And so that feeding of the good bacteria, remember what I said before, the good bacteria, the probiotics, if you will, help you digest your food, but they also produce a substance called butyrate. And not just butyrate, they also make the family of substances called short-chain fatty acids, butyrate being the primary one. And so what is butyrate? It is the fuel source for colon cells. So butyrate deficiencies have been linked to cancer. This is why, you know, a lot of times you'll hear from doctors, make sure you get enough fiber because fiber helps reduce colon cancer. It's because fiber leads to the production of butyrate. Butyrate being the fuel source for your colon cells allows your colon cells to replicate and make new cells. And if they don't have enough fuel, they start to mutate and they can start to form polyps and other type of cancerous lesions. So you want to make sure you're getting enough fiber, you know, for the benefit of the function of the colon. Remember, if the colon cells don't have fuel too, they also are not going to push your bowel movements very effectively. And so again, it's an important aspect of not being constipated. When we talked before about acid, about betaine hydrochloride, and I also mentioned ACV, apple cider vinegar, especially in people with blood type A and type AB who make or generally are lower stomach acid producers. So if you're eating heavy protein diet or heavy meat diet, you know, this may be something that's extremely supportive. Where I see a lot of constipation in my own clients is not so much as a general rule that everybody's constipated. It's very commonly we tie it back to these two things right here, A and AB. These folks are a lot more constipated as a general rule than other folks. And so a lot of times putting them on an acid supplement will help support their digestion of those proteins, so they're still getting protein in their diet, you know, that they need for healing and repair, but it's not backing them up quite so much because we're putting acid down in the stomach to help them start to degrade and break that protein down. So constipation, do these things, and you should be in pretty good shape. If you're not, stay with me, we'll talk about some other things, some of the advanced strategies that you can also apply. So let's talk about diarrhea. What can you do? What are some natural remedies if you're struggling with chronic diarrhea? So, number one thing you can do, I've seen this be the most effective, so put a big primary by that, is just fasting. And you could do water fasting, would be one of the better types of fasting. Not so much, although intermittent fasting can be helpful. Fasting, we're talking about 24 hours up to 3 days, water fasts. The problem with a fast is you can't do it forever, but a fast, a lot of times diarrhea can be triggered by the food that you're eating. We see this a lot in patients with ulcerative colitis or Crohn's, or even celiac disease, where it's what they're eating is actually responsible for causing inflammation in the GI tract, and that the gut and the intelligence of the gut's immune system says, we've got to get this stuff out of here. So what does it do? It hits the dumping mechanism, and boom, we're having chronic diarrhea. And so again, especially in inflammatory bowel diseases where food can be a primary driver or primary trigger, this is one of the reasons why fasting 24 hours, 3 days, a lot of people will notice a profound difference quite immediately. So if you are, chronic diarrhea, if you have one of these diagnoses, you might just try that 24-hour fast. If things start to slow down and you start to feel better, that gives you insight that it's very likely part of your problem is something that you're eating or some things that you're eating. So fasting kind of is effective in two ways. One, it can help with this problem, and two, it can help you self-diagnose whether or not food might be playing a role as an irritant in your bowel. One of the other things that can be extremely effective, probably number two, the second on my list really, is a probiotic. Especially high doses. So when I say high doses, I mean several hundred plus billion colony-forming units a day, typically of a good solid bifido and lactobacillus types of strains of species. These are ones that I've seen be extremely effective in people who are struggling. We'll see this a lot post antibiotics. So somebody goes on an antibiotic, and the hallmark, one of the symptoms associated with antibiotic use, diarrhea starts up, right? One of the reasons why is the antibiotics, what they do, they don't just knock out the bad guy, they knock out the good guys as well. And so this is where my advice would be, as a general rule of thumb, if your doctor's prescribing you an antibiotic, you should always ask, about probiotics concomitantly. And so, there's no danger in doing that. The issue is if you're taking an antibiotic, you don't want to take your probiotic at the same time. So you want to, 2 to 3 hours apart from one another is the best way to do that. And that way you're not just taking a probiotic with the antibiotic and the antibiotic is just neutralizing the effect of the probiotic. So, but very safe to take together, and oftentimes can help to reduce that diarrhea. Now, one of the other things that we'll commonly see medication-induced diarrhea would be people that are going through like chemo, cancer treatments. This can damage the GI tract cells for a lot of folks. It damages the cells of the gut. And one of the reasons why is its impact on vitamin B12 and folate. And so a lot of times if you're going through chemo and you're really, really struggling to normalize your bowel, talk to your doctor about taking high doses of B12 and folate. And when I say high doses, anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 micrograms of B12, and with folate, generally it's 1 to 2 milligrams per day would maybe be something that you'd want to do. I'm sorry, 1 to 2 grams, not milligrams. Let me get that right for you. Because a lot of times higher dose B vitamin can help the GI tract. You need B12 and folate for the cells of the gut to make new DNA, to turn over, to heal and repair, and to make new cells. And that chemo is damaging that capacity. So these two nutrients are very often very, very effective for supporting kind of a balancing of that if you're going through chemo. So again, you've got antibiotics, you've got chemo, two primary causes, or can be two primary causes of diarrhea. Food can be a primary cause of diarrhea. These two things we can combat with nutrition to a certain extent, support with nutrition. Food, very, very easily, we can suspect it. We can use fasting as a tool to help us understand which possible foods may be the trigger. We can also do testing, which we'll talk about here shortly. Now, one of the other common causes of diarrhea, I've mentioned this a few times, and that's high levels of stress. We'll sometimes see people with very intense levels of stress not be able to hang on to their bowels. In other words, their body's in such a fight or flight mode that the dumping mechanism, the sympathetic nervous system, just says, get the food out. Right now we're dealing and coping with stress. We can't cope with the stress of digestion. And so sometimes people under extreme high stress also will start to develop diarrhea. So you also want to consider stress as a major cause, potentially, especially if you live that high stress lifestyle. Now remember too that diarrhea is oftentimes can be a bug. When I say a bug, we're talking about bacteria imbalance. Sometimes it can be fungal. It can also be parasitic. Because your body, when you have an overgrowth or an imbalance in microbiota, is one of the mechanisms, again, that your body's so smart, is trying to get that stuff out of you. So it's hitting the dumping mechanism so that you're trying to flush it out of you and get rid of it. So if it's a bug, this is one of those things you need to visit with your doc. Testing is available. I mean, most GI doctors, in my experience, at least after their patients come to me, I'm surprised how often GI doctors will not test for these things. So this may be something you really have to push for and ask for. Most of them want to do a scope, upper lower GI, and a scope won't tell you. A scope can tell you, whether you're inflamed. A scope can tell you whether you have a polyp. A scope can tell you if you have, sometimes it can tell you if you have celiac or Crohn's or ulcerative colitis type damage. But what a scope can't tell you is why. And so it's limited in its capacity to give you an idea of why the problem exists. It can tell you, what the intestines look like per se, but not why they look that way. And so if you've got a bug, you really got to get specific testing. Now, GI doctors are capable of doing microbiome testing where they can rule out different types of infections. So again, if you've got chronic diarrhea and you don't know why, this is especially true if you've been on a vacation recently where there was shared food space, where there's the potential for food poisoning or where there's the potential for you to pick up a parasite, third world countries, swimming in lakes and rivers and things of that nature, being around animal feces, you can pick up parasites that way. So again, if that's part of your history, you want to let your doctor know, because it may help encourage them to run testing for bacteria, fungus, or parasitic microorganisms that can also be part of the problem. Now, there's some different supplements that a lot of people will take to support gut balance. We have a formula called Microbial Balance, which is a mixture of a number of different things. Berberine has very gut supportive effects. Turmeric can also be very, very helpful and very effective. I like vitamin C. As a gut balancer. Vitamin C has natural antifungal, antiparasitic, and antibacterial properties, so taking it won't hurt you, but it might actually support you through that. But, again, if you suspect a bug, you want to definitely look at getting it treated, getting it identified, and getting it treated. Okay, so let's talk about some special considerations on the digestion front. So some of you may not have a gallbladder. If you've had cholecystectomy or gallbladder surgery removal, where you're going to really struggle is fat digestion. And one of the things that I see in my practice is, usually it's about 5 years after the surgery, we'll start seeing fat digestion problems and malabsorption. And the reason why about 5 years is that we're talking about fat. Fat generally is very easily stored in the body. So when we talk about fat-soluble vitamins like vitamins A, D, E, and K, a lot of times it can take that long for these to start to show up because your body has this storehouse of them that it can tap into. And so, again, that's why it can take about 5 years, but it doesn't have to. I mean, I'm generalizing here. But without a gallbladder, you run into this potential problem. You also run into the problem of omega-3 deficiency. And most people already don't eat enough omega-3 in their diets already, so they're already deficient coming into that surgery, and then you do something where you can no longer properly secrete bile in a timed fashion into the small intestine to aid in the emulsification of fats and to aid in their digestion and absorption. So if you've had your gallbladder removed, I would strongly encourage you or urge you to use a bile supplement before you eat. And in this way, I mean, you remember, not having a gallbladder doesn't mean you don't make bile. Your liver's responsible for making bile, but your gallbladder was responsible for secreting that bile into your small intestine and in a timed fashion. So like as you're eating, it's secreting to help you digest your food, but that timed fashion is gone because the organ's been removed. So now the bile just kind of flows, but not really in a concentrated way before a meal. And so some people find that a bile supplement 10 minutes or so before eating, especially a high-fat meal, can be a game changer for their digestion. So I'd encourage any of you that have had a gallbladder removal to consider that. We actually have a formula called Lipogest, which I designed it specifically for people that don't have gallbladders so that they would have that digestive support in the absence of their organ. The other thing that we have is, special consideration is recent antibiotic use. Antibiotics sometimes are necessary. It's like a two-edged sword. They're sometimes very necessary because you may have a major infection that needs to be treated with an antibiotic, but the damage that it can do to your microbiome after it takes care of the infection. As a matter of fact, I had somebody last week I was talking to that they had a massive infection and they needed treatment. But after they were done with the antibiotic, they'd started to develop all types of problems. They were developing neuropathy, they were developing lots of joint pain and joint aches. And this is because when you mess with the microbiome, you can cause leaky gut. You can allow for the penetrance of, when that gut is leaking, the penetrance of the contents of the GI tract can start leaking into the bloodstream systemically, creating systemic inflammation. Of course, antibiotics are a known trigger for leaky gut, as is infection. So that's why I say it's a two-edged sword. So if you've recently had antibiotic use, you always want to consider bringing in a probiotic supplement. My encouragement is that you would do it at the same time. So if you're on an antibiotic, begin the probiotic simultaneously. And as I mentioned earlier, you don't want to take them at the same time. You want to give 2 to 3 hour gap in between taking one versus taking the other, so that you can help to support kind of a repopulation of good flora into your GI tract to overcome the potential of side effects from the antibiotic. Remember, antibiotics too have been shown to accelerate gluten damage. And so one of the questions I sometimes get asked is, I ate gluten my whole life, I turned 60, I started reacting to it. This can be a trigger or an accelerator for gluten reactivity. It's very well documented in the medical research. I've seen it a number of times in practice. And so, that's why it's so important to support yourself nutritionally after and during using that antibiotic. So again, if you're on an antibiotic, if you need to be on an antibiotic, certainly take it, but get that probiotic in you as well. Now, the other thing I would encourage you is, sometimes you go to your doctor and they just say, here's an antibiotic just in case. Like, how many of you have had that happen where you went to your doctor and you didn't have an infection, but he said, I'm going to write you a prescription for the antibiotic just in case, take it if you need it, right? And so don't do that. Typically, that's a bad idea. If your doctor wants you to take it, get him to commit to you needing to take it. through testing. So, most doctors can do what's called culture and sensitivity testing, where if they think you have an infection, they can culture the tissue or the sputum, or where, depending on where it's located. And from the culture, they can identify the bacteria if it's there. And then from the culture, they can also identify the appropriate antibiotic that would be effective against the bacteria. The name of that test is called a culture and sensitivity. In other words, don't just take a broad spectrum hammer and expect that you're not going to smash things. Get actual personalized information. Ask for culture sensitivity, because sometimes you may have an infection, but it may not be bacteria, it may be fungal. If your infection is fungal, then you take an antibiotic, guess what happens? You make the fungal infection worse. And I see this happen quite a bit too. People come to me after they've been on an antibiotic for whatever reason, their doctor put them on it, and now they have a raging yeast overgrowth that has to be dealt with. So again, these can be life-saving, but they can also be extremely problematic. Don't take them just in case. Get your doctor to do culture sensitivity and really, really help understand whether or not you need it, but don't just take them randomly just in case. Another special consideration, again, we've mentioned blood type a number of times, but it's just, again, I'm gonna hammer this home. If you have A or AB, you're gonna have lower stomach acid, which is gonna make it harder to break down protein. Animal protein specifically. So you guys might do better on a heavier plant-based diet and a lower protein diet, but using acid supplements or apple cider vinegar could be a game changer for your digestion and for your bowel function and your bowel movement. So again, these were just some special considerations that I think many of you should take into account. Now, if you still struggle, if you've done all those things, everything we've talked about, if you've done those, let's talk about some special other considerations that you may want to dive into, because these are other things that I have seen be big, huge problems for people who are doing what they think is right, and that is a lack of information. So test, don't guess, okay? So you can, you may have your digestive problems. You may have constipation, diarrhea, indigestion, heartburn because you're gluten sensitive. It's one of the most common sets of symptoms associated with gluten exposure is gastrointestinal dysfunction. So get tested. If you're gluten sensitive, appropriately change your diet. You can also get tested for other food sensitivities. There are a number of foods, of course. Remember, what affects the gut is what you put in your mouth. And so you can be reactive to food, and always remember this statement: one man's food is another man's poison. And so, just because everybody else can eat it doesn't necessarily mean that your body does well with it. And so getting testing can help you understand whether or not you're reacting to the food itself. Now, if your doctor won't do the tests, go to glutenfreesociety.org. Glutenfreesociety.org. You can get gluten tested and you can get food sensitivity testing done. You don't need a doctor's note. They're very simple tests to do. The reason we even offer it is because so many people came to us and said, our doctors won't do it. Our doctors won't even talk to us about it. So know that you have Gluten Free Society as a resource if you want to do testing. Another thing to consider that research is really effectively shining a light on are something called FODMAPs. And FODMAPs are difficult to digest carbohydrates, basically, that can create a lot of irritation and gas and bloating and IBS, where they're most linked to is IBS. Again, a lot of what we're talking about today. But consider a FODMAP, a low FODMAP diet, as a potential. Now, the problem with low FODMAP diets, as a rule of thumb, is that a lot of foods are FODMAP foods. And so to eliminate all the FODMAPs can be a massive overtaking, and it can be super stressful for some people. So know this, that generally speaking, not everybody with gastrointestinal problems reacts to all the FODMAPs. Sometimes it's just going on a low FODMAP diet and paying attention. Sometimes it's certain FODMAPs that are bothersome, but not others. And so this is where you just want to pay close attention and consider a FODMAP diet as a tool if you're really struggling with IBS type problems. Consider microbial imbalances. I just talked about this a moment ago, but if you're really struggling and your diet's dialed in and you're doing everything right, you could have a bacterial abnormality. You could have a fungal overgrowth. And so you get these tested, right? Get testing done. Ask your doctor to run a microbiome analysis and look at what's growing inside of you, because sometimes it's these bugs, these imbalances that can create a lot of problems for folks. And then the last thing that I would have you consider doing is have your doctor evaluate your pancreatic function and your liver function. Your pancreas does several things, but one of its main functions in digestion is it secretes H2CO3, that's bicarbonate. So it neutralizes acid. And so some people's pancreas is underperforming and they're having reflux and they're having acid type symptoms. Check your pancreas. I see it all the time. Really, with people that have a gluten issue, we see pancreatic insufficiency on the regular. When we look at their pancreatic function. And so, the other thing you can measure, amylase, lipase, and elastase. Sorry, I had to think about that for a minute. These are all enzymes that your pancreas produces and secretes into your small intestine. They help you digest your food. And so again, if your pancreas is underperforming, this can cause a lot of digestive disruption. But again, these can be measured. And then liver function. A lot of people today have a fatty liver and their livers are damaged and not functioning properly. And so bile production becomes a problem. And so their bile becomes deficient or sludgy and they form gallstones. And of course, that's going to impact the way you digest and absorb fats. And so a lot of times with pancreatic and liver dysfunction, people will have, so like if your liver or your gallbladder is malfunction, you have right shoulder pain. So if your right shoulder in the back is constantly hurting, or if you've got pain across the front on the right side, that may be an indicator for you, a referred pain pattern, if you will, that your liver and gallbladder are disruptive or inflamed. And again, one of the most common reasons I see for that is gluten as well. And then pancreatic pain can refer to the mid-back. It can also, pancreatic pain can refer to the front and feel like heartburn as well. So again, these are just things that you can ask your doctor to measure. You can also ask your doctor to perform an ultrasound. Sometimes an ultrasound can be diagnostic of fatty liver and it can be diagnostic of pancreatic inflammation. So these are non-invasive tests. And these others up here are just simple blood tests that can be run. So again, you've got an array of things that you can talk with your doctor about to get tested. If you've done diet and you've done lifestyle and you feel like you've got everything dialed in, but you're still struggling with digestive problems, that's when it's time to move away from home remedies and move into the realm of getting help, right? So those are just some of the more common things that you can get measured to see if there's a better solution for you.